There's a huge change being proposed for how we vote here in Michigan. It's called ranked choice voting. Now, you've probably heard proponents say it's a fair system, but, well, not everyone sees it that way. In fact, a new report from the Michigan Fair Elections Institute argues it poses a fundamental threat to our state's elections. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the specific arguments laid out in that very critical report.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a handle on what this new system actually is. Then we'll walk through the report's three main objections: its impact on you, the voter, the risks it could pose to election integrity, and finally, the actual price tag of making such a massive change.
Okay, so before we dive into the report's big objections, let's just get a really clear picture of what we're even talking about. How would this whole new system work?
At its heart, ranked choice voting, or RCV, is a totally different way to think about your ballot. Instead of just picking your one favorite candidate and that's it, you're actually asked to rank them in order of preference. This is my first choice, my second, my third, and so on.
And this really gets to the heart of the difference. What we have now in Michigan is called first past the post. It's simple, right? Whoever gets the most votes wins. The proposed switch is to instant runoff voting, which the report describes as a way more complex, multi-round counting process just to figure out who the winner is.
The report also gets into the why of this debate, citing a theory from the Honest Elections Project. The claim is that this push for RCV isn't just about tweaking the mechanics of voting, but that it's actually part of a much bigger, well-funded political strategy to change who wins elections. Okay, with that context set, the report starts building its case, and it begins with the direct impact on voters. The whole argument here is that this system doesn't just create confusion, but it could actually lead to people's votes not being counted at all. And the report kicks off this section with a really startling number. It calculates that when you combine all the ballots spoiled from marking errors with something called exhausted ballots from later rounds, as many as 1 in 4 votes in an RCV election could just be tossed out.
You know, the authors dug into the research and they point to a whole list of negative effects. They argue that RCV actually suppresses turnout, leads to way more errors, and causes this ballot exhaustion. That's where your vote basically becomes null and void if all the candidates you ranked get eliminated. According to the report, the end result is just voter frustration and people feeling like their vote didn't matter.
And to really hammer home that error issue, the report brings up a University of Pennsylvania study. And that study found that ballots in these RCV races are a whopping 10 times more likely to be rejected because they were filled out wrong compared to the simple single-choice ballots we use now.
And this isn't just a hypothetical, right? The report points to actual academic research from Jason McDaniel, who studied over 200 cities. He found a measurable drop in voter participation. We're talking 3 to 5 percentage points right after RCV was brought in.
But the report's critique doesn't stop with the individual voter's experience. Its next big point is about what it calls fundamental risks to the entire election process. We're talking about big questions around transparency, accountability, and even security.
So, let's break down this instant runoff process. If nobody gets over 50% of the vote on the first count, the candidate in last place gets dropped. Then their votes get moved to whoever those voters picked as their second choice, and this whole cycle repeats until somebody finally crosses that 50% line. The report argues this complexity makes a simple manual recount incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible.
So, when you put it all together, the report is basically saying there are a ton of vulnerabilities. It argues RCV would take counting out of the hands of our local clerks, and it highlights a brand new MIT study from 2024 that claims there's a security flaw that could actually compromise the secret ballot and potentially open the door to new kinds of vote buying.
And the report doesn't just make these claims on its own. It pulls from a bunch of different academic findings to back it all up. You've got MIT researchers saying a security flaw is literally baked into the rules. A Cornell study showing that in most RCV elections, the winner didn't even get a majority of first-choice votes. And another study suggesting RCV can lead to more polarized outcomes, not less.
And this quote, this really gets to the heart of the problem from an administrative standpoint. How can you be sure about the results of a really close or controversial election if a simple, transparent hand recount isn't really an option anymore?
All right, so beyond the risks to voters and the election itself, the report's final major argument is about the practical burdens. It basically asks, what's the real price of making this change, both in cold hard cash and in the effort it takes to run it?
And check this out. That same MIT study we mentioned earlier, it looked at 20 years of data and found a really strong connection. Cities that adopted RCV ended up spending significantly more money on their elections, period.
And it's not just about the dollars and cents. The report points to the huge administrative burden on the people who actually run our elections. It cites a study of local clerks in Maine, which uses RCV for statewide elections, and it found that a staggering 90% of them, 90%, would support getting rid of it.
So, you might be asking, who foots the bill for all this? Well, the report argues that the costs for brand new voting machines, huge voter education campaigns to explain the new system, and printing more complicated ballots, all of that would fall squarely on Michigan's local taxpayers. And if you want a real-world example of just how big that price tag could be, the report points straight to Maine. A University of Cincinnati Law Review article concluded that making the switch to RCV literally doubled the state's entire budget for elections.
Okay. So after laying out all these different arguments, the impact on voters, the risks to integrity, and the serious financial costs, the report from the Michigan Fair Elections Institute comes to a very, very clear conclusion.
And this quote really sums it all up, right? The author's final position is that the current system here in Michigan, even with its own issues, is way better than what they see as a flawed, confusing, and overly complex alternative.
Now, look, it's really important to remember something here. This explainer has focused entirely on the specific arguments and the objections raised in this one report. It represents one critical perspective in what is a much bigger ongoing conversation about the future of voting here in Michigan.
And all of this really leaves us with a big final question for you to think about. When we're designing our election systems, what should we value the most? Is it the simple, easy-to-understand clarity of our current system? Is it the potential for broader representation that RCV supporters talk about? Or is it the absolute rock-solid security of the process? It's a huge question as this debate moves forward.